Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to one of our podcasts here at The Way Forward. We are very privileged today to have Karyn Eliot with us. Karyn and I went to the National War College together in Washington, D.C. many years ago and started a great friendship over the years and have had the privilege to work together in a number of different capacities. And I thought it would be fascinating to bring her onto our podcast because she represents a very small niche within the federal government. She is retired now from that role, but it's always fun to have you on the show with us, Karyn. How are you today? You doing all right?
Excellent. It's a pleasure to be here.
Excellent. We're all up really early in the morning, so hopefully we can get going with our coffee here pretty quickly. But Karyn, I always love talking about. I think it was Mark Twain said that the best person to bring in to do the introduction is the person who did it themselves. And so, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about your unique and interesting background.
Sure, sure. Well, I guess I'll start at the interesting part where I met you. So I retired from the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, about 5 years ago now. So my retirement was when the world shut down. So that was an interesting time to make a transition. And my focus while I was in the agency was in the science and technology area. So there's operations, analysis, science and tech, and a few other pillars, directorates, if you will, in the organization to be able to perform the CIA's mission. And my focus was generally in the science and tech side. So I spent a lot of my career working with either foreign liaison, principally our Five Eyes partners, trying to identify technology of interest that we can bring to bear against our hardest problems. How do we work better together in coalitions, et cetera, using technology? And then also working with companies. How do we leverage technology that companies bring to bear? One of my last assignments was how do we partner better and lean in? How do you look across non-traditional market verticals to find technology of interest, which may be there that you don't know about? I mean, honestly, technology is really ubiquitous in a lot of areas. So it's the use case that's the differentiator. And somebody in a non-traditional market vertical could be teasing out a capability for something that we would love to know about that you could use in an offensive or defensive way. So I focused on that a lot. But I think the sort of thread that went through all my different assignments, my overseas assignments, my interagency assignments, I also was posted at the National Reconnaissance Office, and even my time at the National War College was how do you engage and leverage the diversity of experience, education, and perspective to bring to bear against hard problems. We all want to focus on mission. We all want to solve problems. And if you can have different people who have different perspectives, you can get to go so much faster. And you can actually come up with innovative ways that you would almost be near impossible to do by yourself. And so the different kinds of jobs I had were that. And also working in the interagency, I really sort of enjoyed the dysfunctional family table, as I affectionately call it. I loved the big interagency. It was hard. And I look at you being Army, it was really hard because as they call it, the 800-pound gorilla at all tables were always defense. But there are a lot of other interesting departments and agencies out there, as you're well aware, in which we had a lot of experience working with in War College. And some of those interagency sessions were really eye-opening and allowed me to figure out, ooh, this whole interagency thing isn't really a chore. It's actually of great value. And so being able to spread my network and engage in those areas was really great too. So when I retired, I thought, I want to keep doing something like that. I want to work with a lot of companies, whether they're small startups or mid-size or non-traditional bigs. And what I mean by that, it's not the big integrators that you hear about and that we all know and love. It's the giant companies that haven't worked with government and don't understand why there would be value there, et cetera. And, trying to see if you can leverage them as well. So I think when I retired, I thought, I want to kind of keep doing that. And I want to continue to work with our closest allies. So then when I set up my consulting firm and also became a partner with some other formers in defense and intelligence in Five Eyes group. Both of those really focused on continuing doing that. I mean, I truly believe sometimes you can serve better from the outside. So we all need to feed our souls, and I think doing this kind of engagement really helps with that. And also the part about continuing to give back by mentoring folks who are on the inside, helping them through a specific problem or navigating their career, et cetera. That's still rewarding, and you still get to do that from the outside too. So it's been a great ride.
And you're still in the DC area, I guess. Is that true?
I am.
Okay. Well, hey, look, I love it that when we meet, the DoD meets the agency or meets the other branches of the federal government, there's always this belief that this big, huge behemoth, the DoD, is like you said, the 500-pound gorilla in the room. When in reality, we think you're the 500-pound gorilla in the room. And so it was great. And the audience doesn't know it, that you're split up in these staff groups. And so in the staff groups, we were in committee one, and Karyn sat in the cubicle next to me. So I learned more that year than any of the classes that I took, just listening to the conversations from her cubicle. She's a fascinating person. So that's what we wanted to have you here today. And there's a lot of acronyms and things that you just articulated, the 5 C's, whatever that is, you guys are always
I
talking.
apologize.
No, it's okay. We're going to poke you today and get you to spell some of those things out for us. And so, Karyn, I do a local radio show here, and I'm going to put a plug in for Aaron West, who's the host of the show every Thursday. And he always starts off every episode trying to get me to tell him something that's top secret. So I try to tell him that that's not going to happen. But, people are just constantly, thinking that, we know something that they don't know, and they find that intriguing. And so I can't imagine what it would be like to be a career CIA person such as yourself, and matriculate through all the things that you've done. So thanks for your service. All right.
Thank
So
you.
you've done it, and you've done it well. And like you said, you took risk going to the War College so you could build connections, which, as we all know in hindsight as mentors, that's the key to success in not just our government, but any government, is learning how to work with other agencies, understand the capabilities, and know when to tap into those resources. And so my experience with the War College brought that on steroids, after having learned some of that growing up in the Army, but learning more about it after the time we met. And so as a professional CIA person, tell us about your leadership skills. Tell us about the things that make Karyn Eliot a special person within the agency in terms of leading, mentoring. I mean, you brought mentoring up at least twice. So obviously that's important to you.
It is. I think one of the things that you learn early on is there's such a broad group of expertise in the organization, and you, like any organization, like any large organization, the CIA is no different. But the one thing where your focus also is engaging with foreign nationals, like at the War College, where we had 100 different countries or what have you represented there. You have a lot of differentiation in sort of, I'll call it non-traditional areas where the culture piece is big. So you've got the language piece and the culture piece on top of the education piece, and the experience piece, the expertise. And it really became clear, although at the time I would say a lot of folks in the agency were really focused on servant leader, which is fantastic. But it became clear, at least to me, and I think a number of others, that you kind of had to morph leadership styles based on several factors. One is the people you're talking to. Obviously, you can't lead people in a certain way where it just doesn't resonate. You'll just constantly bang your head up against the wall. And then what is the specific mission and the urgency? Sometimes you just need to be a dictator and make decisions. And other times, you need to be a servant leader. Other times you need to really focus on, transformation, it's so you're like a changeling in a way. And it's not because you're selling out and going with the latest flavor of the day. It's because you realize, oh, this isn't going to work here. So let me lean in and let me try something different. Because at the end of the day, you just want the mission done, and the people are the mission. I know it's like that in defense and other entities as well. So leaning in and morphing styles, I think, is really important. And because you're immersed in other cultures when you're overseas, and in your different travels when you're in the agency, I think you kind of figure that out early on, and it tends to become second nature. It's not always successful the first go around either, but that's okay. Some of my biggest successes were failures first, so I'm good with
All
it.
right. Well, there's a lot to unpack there because people give credit to are you familiar with Daniel Goleman's writings on emotional intelligence? People were just blown out of the water when they read where he talked about leadership styles. He goes, you would never, play golf with just a 7-iron in your bag. You take your whole bag of clubs with you to play golf if you're going to do it well. And you end up using every club, and that's exactly what you just articulated through your experience. Is that you have to. I think the first piece of it is be emotionally intelligent enough to understand the situation you're in, and you're very good at understanding yourself. And I think your training and your personality has led you to focus on others. And that was the unique skill set that I saw the moment I met you, is your ability to, you're very confident in what you know in yourself, but you seek out information about others to become empathetic and understand what makes them tick. And you're able to use that very quickly in order to establish that relationship and make it a positive one. And I think what's also important to unpack is what you said. And they were not just always leading Americans. Okay. You're not always just interacting with people from the United States. Even within the United States, that's hard. But in your profession, you had to deal with countries where, quite frankly, you were a woman standing there in front of someone who didn't respect you by virtue of your gender. How did you have to deal with that?
Um, it's interesting. Certainly, especially I'll say in places in the Middle East. Um, it's a lot of people say you should just be your true self no matter what, and why should you have to cover your arms and this and that. It's just about respect for what's important in cultures and the cultural norms of others. So none of that ever bothered me. I didn't think I was compromising myself or anything else, or the values of women when I did that. That's just a norm, and it's fine. I think that most of the people on the other side of the table really did try to lean in and understood that, even though it's the cultural differences were clear. I think you need to pull on the facets of yourself that understand that it's not about being prideful and teaching anyone a lesson, because that's not what you're there for, and they're not going to learn it anyway. So it's just about getting the job done and focusing on that. And I got used to being the only woman in the room for a very long time, since I'll say, because I'm old. I've had a lot of years back in the day where you truly were the only ones standing in the room. And I think sometimes it can be very disarming. There was one time where we had somebody, which everyone knew, because he flat out said he didn't really, he was from another organization, but he was still American, flat out did not think a woman should be leading this particular interagency group. And I said, okay, well, I'm here, so I'm gonna do it. And I wanted to see how he would behave. Let's give him a shot. Maybe he'll be different in this construct. So I thought, oh, the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab that tray of cookies, and I'm gonna take it in. And then I'm gonna grab the coffee and the water, and I'm gonna take it in. And I'm going to see how he treats me, right? And so he clearly thought, which maybe that was unfair and unkind of me to do that, oh, she must just be the person who brings in the tea and cookies, right? And so it's funny, because my deputy, he fought me on, and he's like, don't do that. You know how he is. He's going to think. I said, I don't care. This will be entertaining, if nothing else, teach a lesson maybe. So we sat down, and nobody was on my team was really asserting themselves as the lead. He just started talking right away, which was fine. And then after a while, when he was done, I asked him, "Are you done?" And he kind of looked at me and he said, "Yes." And I said, "Great. So now we should start at the beginning with introductions. This is who I am, and this is my role." And loved what you had to say. Interesting perspective. Now let me tell you how we're going to do this. Because sometimes but you can do it in a way that's, coming from the side, and it could be sort of a little disarming. But after that, honestly, I think he was a little embarrassed, and that's why I said maybe that was unkind of me, and I apologize. But after that, he was actually a pleasure to deal with. So, but that was just one thing that popped into my mind. I hadn't thought of that for a very long time until you said that. But I think mostly, especially in today's world, people are really almost have the muscle memory of listening to the person and not worrying about if they're male, female, or anything else. I think that in most places, from my perspective, we've gotten past that. I've never felt like I was held back because of that. And it became the norm just to work with a lot of males, although over time that changed. And in the agency in particular, it was interesting because you looked at senior leadership for a while, and all the way up the chain, it was, female, 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 which was kind of unusual in my life there. So it was good, though. I loved it.
I was going to ask you about that because I've always had the impression that it was fairly balanced, but obviously, as you grew up, it wasn't. But today, it seems it almost reflects, university numbers. It's like looks like 52, 49, whatever it is. What do you attribute that to in the agency? Anything in particular?
I think it's there was a real focus on how do you kind of understand some of the I'll call it unique aspects of how women communicate versus men. And I'm generalizing, I realize that. But there was a lot of work done to say, why is it that more men are getting this promotion or getting this senior school or getting to be the chief in this organization, et cetera, than women, when we know they're very qualified, and it's like they self-selected out. And what we found were interesting things like, if you have a requirement of maybe here are 6 required things you must do for this position, for example, and here are 6 desired, the men would wax eloquently about, if you, let's say, I needed to have be operationally certified in this, and I needed to have 10 years experience. And they would just say, although I didn't have any of that, I'm really good riding a bike. I mean, I'm teasing it, but
Yeah,
they would just say something, and women would say, "Oh, I don't have that." And
yeah,
worse yet, in numbers, they tended to do this more. They would actually say, "Oh, I don't have the desired." And it wasn't even in the required, and they just self-select out.
yeah.
So I think once that realization came to light, there was a focused area of, hey, how about we meet with folks and we try to have better kind of mentorship on the inside of, here's how you might want to respond to these kinds of things. Here's what people are looking for. And it was kind of twofold. Let's change how we advertise these positions. Let's try and understand that there are some specific differences in how people read and understand things, as required being you got to listen to every word and match it. And let's see if we can't try to soften that hard line of distinction there. And so I think that helped, because you had both people saying, "Oh, you mean I can say, although I'm not operationally certified, I stayed at a Holiday Inn Express." Again, I'm being cheeky, but you could see that, oh, I just want to, what we tried to tell them is, people who look at those applications, they just want to see how you will be sitting in that chair.
Yeah.
So how will you perform? How will you be able to leverage all your experience and education, network, etc.? They're not really asking for every little word on the piece of paper. It's just a government thing where that's how you articulate your needs. So I think once we kind of got past that, I think the numbers started changing. People started feeling more comfortable that they could give it a go. There was no downside. And we also told people, if you get into an interview, and you get offered the job, you don't necessarily have to take it if you learned new things, because I think there was also the perception of, if I get an interview and they offer me the job, I have to take it. But the only way I'm going to understand if this is right for me, if I can add value and I can grow from it, is if I get in that room and talk to these people, because it's too hard to meet with them beforehand. And so people would self-select out. A lot of women would just self-select out. And I wasn't sure I believed any of that until I actually saw the data and saw the numbers. And one of the times we looked at numbers of how women do in intelligence was when I was over in the UK, and they were trying to, fix a problem they thought was perception. And then they had collected all this data, and they were having the same issues, because they said, we've brought these women up. They've had all these experiences. They should be the next X. Why are they self-selecting out? And so when we started working with others, realizing, oh, this is a little broader than we thought. Then I looked at the numbers and I said, oh, yeah, I guess this really is something. I think as a female, you don't want to say, oh, it's just because I'm a woman, you never want to say, look at the first woman this or that. It's like, no, don't say that. Just look at this great candidate we hired. That's all I want. And then we discover whatever they are, right? So I think I had a little bit of a prejudice with that. And then when I saw the numbers, I couldn't deny it. I said, wow, we really are. There's a chunk of women who really are looking at things very differently from this chunk of men, and that's how the numbers got skewed.
Oh yeah, yeah. Sydney, Sydney Hughes, who's on our team at the Way Forward, she does career counseling, and she really focuses on mothers who are in that transitional period of trying to figure out work-life child balance. And some of the stuff that she articulates, I mean, we're going to have to get you two together to talk about this, because what you just said is absolute gold. And I've seen it in my career. When I was doing recruiting for officers for the Reserve Officer Training Program, or ROTC, we were trying to figure out what was going on with our African American males in terms of matriculation to the highest ranks of the Army. And if you look at the Army today, you'll see our efforts 7 or 8 years ago have really bared a lot of fruit. We have a lot of African American general officers in very key positions, combat arms positions, things of that nature, because of the way we looked at, again, the same kind of things. What are those very specific things that you want to think everybody's, if one group of, gender or race or ethnicity, whatever it is, but there are nuances, and there are cultural things, there are regional things that affect that. And one of the ones, when I was looking at this, we only had 9% African American cadets in a 36,000 cadet corps across 986 universities. And the question was why? And more importantly, why are the African American numbers higher at a non HBCU than at the HBCUs? I didn't understand how that worked either.
Yeah.
But what we learned, well, what just happened on was that if you want to recruit African American males, you go to their annual conclaves for their fraternities. We weren't recruiting against where the talent pooled for normal routine things within their fraternity, their Greek system. So we started going to those, and which was interesting was we were hitting African American males who were matriculating from their sophomore to their junior year. In ROTC, you only need 2 years. And that's a heck of a time to walk in there and say, hey, look, I got a job waiting for you, and I'll pay for your last 2 years of school. And we'll look at getting rid of your college debt. And we jumped to 18%. And as of today, we're 19%. And so, a little bit different of a twist to it. But again, it's trying to figure out what is it that you're looking for? What's the end result supposed to look like or your interpretation of what the end result's supposed to look like? And where are you wasting talent because you're using one size fits all? And that's what it sounded like you guys were suffering from. I know I see it out here in the civilian sector, in the private sector, where these algorithms are worse than the men who wrote them in terms of holding, you only got 4 years, 9 months and 18 days in the job. You don't have 5, it kicks you out. If you immediately kicks you out and prejudice against people, when I don't think that's the intent. And one I saw recently, and I don't know if you had any experience with this, but I saw a kid with a master's degree in program management from a very, very reputable university, a master's degree, turned down because he didn't have a PMP, which is a certification.
Right.
And when he approached the recruiter, he said, "I have a master's degree." He goes, "Well, we don't want the master's degree. We want the certification." And he's like, I don't understand. So he's actually going after the cert now just to get through the algorithm, which is just a tremendous waste of what we do to people with talent management these days.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So Karyn, so in a perfect world with the perfect person that you're talking to, in terms of you have the best interest of whatever it is you're trying to do at mind, tell me more about the techniques you use to figure out that person so you can get your mission accomplished, as you stated earlier.
Oh boy. Well, I think first of all, there's absolutely a getting to know you phase. You can, for reasons you articulated just now, and we've been discussing, it's more than just a block check exercise. I mean, it's nice to narrow the field or get an understanding by having kinds of blocks checked, but really having a direct engagement and being able to have a true understanding of how the person would be in that position that you're looking to fill. And I think a lot of it is also, I mean, EQ's big. I swear I probably would have had a third less personnel issues if people were more self-aware. And when you make them aware of something, and I know you've had these same aha moments, they look at you and they say, "Really? Like, yeah, really.
Yeah.
Why has no one told me?" Well, I think people think you should know that yourself. And, so how about, let me see how I can help you work on this and those kinds of things. So I think understanding where the person is, it doesn't mean if they have, low EQ or, they're just not self-aware that you're not going to put them in a job to get it done. Because some of those things are kind of individual, an army of one kind of thing. But if you're going to have somebody in a team environment, they need to understand how they can actually impact the greater whole. And I think that's where self-awareness is really big. So that's a big one. And I am a firm believer that you need to be able to have this discussion. You can't just get it on a piece of paper, but seeing how people understanding how people see themselves through the written word is really important. We're a society of communication. It's a global world of communication. If you can't articulate in some form, and in the government it's written, then you've got a problem. I mean, even in War College, we saw incredibly impressive officers from different countries who, and from the US, who did awe awe-inspiring kinds of work, and they could not communicate in writing and needed a lot of assistance to be able to articulate things. And the writing isn't always important, but when you're trying to share in and scale that information, you kind of need it written down. And if it takes two of you to write it down because you need a writer to write it for you, that's not really as efficient. It may be effective, but it's not as efficient, and your words may not get out there because people can't do that. So being able to articulate things in writing is very important in our world. So I'd say that is another one that I like to see. So having people write about themselves and seeing how they view themselves and how they can articulate that, I think is important. And then how do you engage like this? How do you have conversations? It's sometimes kind of eye-opening where you look at, maybe you've narrowed it down to 3 candidates for a position and you're thinking, I think it's going to be 1, 2, and 3, but I'm going to have these conversations and we're going to do interviews, etc. And then either it's through, background, we used to call it, what your hall files say, or you're, a little more checking with the old bosses, etc. That's another important one. And then really the conversation. And so what you find sometimes is, oh my gosh, I know I had to tease it out of her or tease it out of him, but I think I'm changing my mind because after all these pieces, the, how are you viewed in your prior experiences in teams, on your own, etc. How can you communicate in the written word? And now, how do you communicate verbally? I think that this kind of a discourse for me generally trumped the others. And I think that is the whole personal touch, but that's me. I'm also a hugger by nature. So it's, I want to have the conversations. I want to see the people. And I think sometimes, especially depending on when you're leading science and technology organizations, depending on what the mission is, if it's some R&D thing and I need the best X that we have to go deep and evaluate some technology, I really don't care about the EQ bit, how they communicate, or anything else. I just need them to do that. So again, like leadership styles, what you're looking for morphs and changes, but generally speaking, I would say our experiences were building highly functional teams, and you need to be able to make sure you understand how that person performs with others as well as individually.
You talked about that one incident with the individual who didn't realize you were the leader of the group. When you're out there and you're interacting with either U.S. personnel who don't know that, or you're in a role where nobody knows what you really do, or when you're actually trying to press the mission, the U.S. interest, whatever it is, do you wear a different mask every time? Do you have one that you prefer to start with and you morph from? How does somebody do that in the world that you come from?
I think it's you start with your authentic self, and then you continually, read the room and read the person in front of you, because what you really want is to make sure that they hear what you're saying, they can process what you're saying, they understand your meaning. And to do that, you tend to have to morph sometimes. So if and sometimes it's cultural, they need to say their whole piece and you need to not interrupt or interject. And you also can't take notes. And so you have to remember everything. And so you're thinking, oh my gosh, there's 5 things already that I want to go ahead and respond to, but I can't because it's in this, these cultural norms mean that I can't do any of the things that I normally would do to make sure I don't leave anything out. And then you wait, and then it's your turn, and then you have to, depending on what the cultural norm is, carefully articulate things in a way that the person on the other side can understand, not just hear. And so I think it's it's starting with who you are, and I try to be very frank and just say things how they are. Um, it's with I will say that with our closest allies, it works well. I don't really have to change much of my authentic self. Um, Sometimes the hierarchies are a little bit different in rank structures and heads of agencies, and as you get up in the government structures, it's really not any different than ours. You just need to be respectful whether the person understands what they're talking about or not. You have to play the game of, is it important for me to make this statement now, or can I speak to the doers who were not the talking heads after. And I think the hardest thing for me, and it was when I was younger, I had to correct everything at the table. And that was so dumb. But I felt like, but it's the right thing to do, and I have to do the right thing. I'm representing my country. And it's like, oh no, the real work happens sometimes at the pub or, in the back room and other things. And so having to learn that the hard way by actually being told, I screwed something up because I had to be, sort of self-righteous about the whole thing. That was a bitter pill to swallow. But I think it definitely taught me a lot, which is why earlier on I said sometimes my greatest lessons learned were from failures. They were my greatest successes because I got it. It's like, oh my gosh, it was me. I'm the one I talk about. It's me. So I think it's more of an appreciation that sometimes I can't get 100% of what I'm looking for anyways. And I'm never going to get there. And I don't need to fill up the room with a lot of words and really badger someone. I just need to lean into who they are and speak in a way that I hope the people who need to hear will understand, and then do the math in my head. How much of this can I just take offline? And this is really just the talking heads and, cheersing and whatever. So hopefully that makes sense.
Perfect sense. So, but now I'm going to make an assumption here that you're a bit more extroverted than introverted. Is that an accurate assessment?
Yes.
Okay. And so by having that self-awareness, how do you do what you just said when that person sitting across from you is the introvert and they're providing you very little read on what it is they're thinking or what they're doing? How do you keep from laying out too many of your cards before you figure out what this person's all about? Do you have any techniques of how you provoke an introvert to engage?
Well, I think it's the one technique that I think most people use is, even though I'm an extrovert, it sort of turns into a challenge in a way. Um, I just leave lots of pregnant pauses, and even though they're introverts, it's nature abhors a vacuum, right? So then they don't know what to do, and they start looking around, and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to get something now. I'm going to get, then they'll talk. I just smile, real friendly, and maybe turn my head and wait as if, it's like a game
It's your
of chicken
turn.
almost. And then finally it starts, and then sometimes just talking about something that has nothing to do with what you really are there to discuss, I think is, trying to find common ground,
Yeah.
whether it's the places you visited, if there's a family, even if you don't want to talk too much about personal items, which sometimes when you're dealing with people, you don't talk too much about the personal side, but there are things that you can talk about that feel safe and make the person feel comfortable. And then putting in those strategically placed pregnant pauses kind of pushes the person to say something, especially since most of the discussions for me happened where they were hosting. So it happens on their turf. They have to be good hosts. So they kind of have to speak a little bit. I think the hardest ones are when there's a translator. I don't care for those, not because I don't trust the translators, I do, but because you can't lay out your strategic pauses, and you can't kind of, the person has this other person to kind of fill the airspace, and then it just doesn't work quite as well. But oh well.
Yeah, well, that's a whole different, unique challenge, having your own linguist and them having a linguist, or just one in between the two of you trying to get the nuance. Because I know you well enough to know that you use humor as a part of your approach. You use the hug to throw people off, even though you say you're a hugger. I know that's a technique, but yeah, it's interesting because we're both very extroverted, and there's probably people who are introverted watching this disagreeing with us. But what I've what my lesson has been is don't fill in that space. Even when I created it when I was younger, I would still fill in that space because I feel obligated to fill in that space, especially when somebody has said something or asked a question. Even if I don't have a question, I'm going to ask a question because it's almost like it feels insulting to the other person if you don't ask a question.
Right.
They put all this effort to host me and to ask that question. Then if I don't ask for one, or if I don't try to give them one, then I'm being disrespectful. But the introvert piece of those meetings, the dynamics that you and I share in common, are difficult for us because we're supposed to listen more. And you and I have a tendency to do this when someone's talking. Even you said it a second ago, you're going to turn your head and give them that look like now it's your turn to talk. It's the don't be thinking about the next thing you're saying. Spend more time listening to what they're saying before you formulate your response, if in fact you actually have to have one. And that became more clear to me when I was working with foreign nationals than it was with U.S. nationals, because I made assumptions about us. But when you go over there and you're working with somebody and you sit down, the one that always caught me off guard, and I'm curious if this happened to you, I'd sit down with the primary and the primary wouldn't say a word, but their spokesperson would be the person you're talking to. But in some countries, it was disrespectful not to look at the person who was in charge. You would use it for me as an American. I want to look at the person who's talking and pay attention and listen to what they're saying. But it was considered an insult because this was the senior person who had them speaking on their behalf. Did you ever run into that dynamic?
Absolutely. And it's just odd. You just tell yourself you're going to stare straight ahead at them. And then you have these talking heads over here. And then you have to remember, even it's like that with translators too, that you start talking to the translators like, oh, wait a second, I need to come back here. It's
Yeah.
just, it's hard because um, I think especially Americans, what you learn is, and this is when you are serving overseas and dealing with folks from other countries, even when you're separated by a common language, like our colleagues in the Five Eyes nations and the Commonwealth. Americans are unique, and we have fun little idioms that are developed for our uniqueness by them, by our foreign colleagues, and they laugh because they can be so, especially the Brits whom I loved working with, they can just be so stoic regardless of anything that's happening, and it's just ingrained in them. And for us, it's like we're either looking at following the squirrel or what's the next thing, and our heads 5 moves forward, and so slowing that whole thing down to be like you were talking about in the moment, to pull out the nuances of how the person takes a breath before they talk to their translator. Oh, he's tired of this. Let me get to the point. Or, you know, wanting to constantly interrupt the translator because, oh, he's really engaged in this. Let me continue this conversation. Looking for those little helpful hints to make you better understand things that normally you would pick up in the course of a conversation, but it's just too hard when there's either someone else speaking and the senior's just sitting there and it's not a translation issue, or it's a translator there and you just can't get your groove on, kind of thing.
Yeah, it is. It's like the gears are off.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many moles I've counted and freckles and
Oh my
trying to
gosh.
trying to look at them and there's nothing happening. There's no nonverbals, nothing. It's a very difficult situation. But these are the kind of cool things you get to do in the professions that you and I grew up in. So somebody in our audience right now is going, that sounds really cool what Karyn does or did or continues to do as a living, because we don't really know for sure. We won't ask. How does one get into the agency? What's the process?
So it's big brave world on the internet now. Honestly, if you go to cia.gov, it talks about all the different types of careers. It talks about the mission and the focus areas and the kinds of backgrounds that would be helpful to the organization. And it's a secure, protected website. If you write into it to apply for something or have an interest, whether they do lots of internships, you can do them in college and grad school. A lot of interns become employees. I think it's people have a notion that I can't just do that blindly, because nobody gets in blindly. You have to have someone, and that's really not true. There are a lot of there's a lot of volume in there. And you get nutters too, that because why wouldn't you, right? But I think they've got really strong teams that people who they have professionals who know how to do HR recruiting kinds of things, but they also have people from all the areas that are hiring that look for the right talent and understand the culture and personalities, et cetera, where they came from, so they can kind of do the translation and work through what may be articulated on an application and still pull people through. So I think they have a good way of bringing talent in, but I tell people, I have two groups of people that I talk to. One is it's people who want to work in the agency, whether they've worked somewhere else and want to make a change, and maybe they're a contractor for DoD and they want to be in the CIA, or it's people who are getting out and they said, I'm kind of done. I'm not retiring, but I'm resigning. I need something different or whatever. And I still feel compelled to say, okay, but have you looked at all the options inside the organization first? Because they really need you. If you're banging your head against the wall and things aren't working where you are, you get to recreate yourself a million times. And at the agency, the mission is so broad that you could do something on logistics, then you can do something in operations, you can do something in research and development, you can do something in open source, you can be an analyst, you can keep reinventing yourself. Now, you're not going to be an expert in all of those things, but as you become more senior, you can manage different things. And so I think being able to move to another place is important. And when I talk to people, whether they're in university looking to apply, or whether they're we call them mid-career hires, seasoned people looking for a change, I tell them, look, you feel like this is your one shot to reinvent yourself. It's really not. You can go into this organization and you can continue to reinvent yourself. Once you're in, you can look to see where you can apply your skills and education to solve other hard problems. Or if you want to grow in some way and you always wanted to do, we call it the seventh floor, sort of like the E-ring or whatever, you wanted to do more executive kinds of things, you can actually be an executive officer and an executive assistant to see how those inner workings work. So you want to learn that, you apply and you go and you do that for a year, and then you go back and you do something else. And so when you're comparing, do I go into the agency or do I work for this company? It's not just about the money. I mean, sure, you want to get paid and you need to put your kids through school and all these other things, that money's important. And I believe economic security is inextricably bound to national security. So I'm all about that. But it's not enough, generally speaking. It's the mission and what you're doing. And then knowing that, it's not like back in the day, I'm going to have a government job for 20 years and I'm going to retire and I'm going to do the exact same thing. You could do that, I suppose, but you don't have to. You don't have to leave government in order to have new experiences. So I try to talk to people about that. But the application part's pretty easy. And if you know anyone who knows anyone, someone will find a CIA person for you to talk to. And people are welcome to talk to me. So, of course, Chris and Molly have my contact info, and I'll find the right person and the right specialty for people to have a conversation with. People in the agency are always very happy to have people come to them and get a little assistance. But I will say that the website does a great job of saying a lot of things. In fact, when I was one of my last jobs before I retired, when I was trying to put some unclassified challenges out there, and it was really hard. And we finally got them coordinated to release for official use only. So it's unclassified, but you have to carefully handle it. And the part that took the longest was we'd actually pulled things off of the CIA website on the internet, okay? CIA.gov, it's there. And for an explanation of, let's just explain CIA for people who might not know it. You meet a new company, you want to say, hey, here's a little bit about the organization. Here's some challenges we might have. Everything's pretty generic. And people went nuts over the stuff. And I kept saying, okay, we pulled it off the internet, and it's what we put on the internet, not what someone else is saying. So I say that to let people know that there's a lot of interesting information in there. They have really leaned in to let you know exactly what the CIA is about, and they will look at every application, and it's not just a machine that does it. So I would say put your best foot forward, apply. It costs you nothing, a little bit of time to fill out the paperwork, and give it a go. It's fun.
I love your enthusiasm. Now, for the older folks on the podcast, i.e., me and everybody younger than me, what tell us about your transition. Tell us what you do now, and how does that motivate you to get up every morning and run to your computer or wherever you go?
Well, I feel very fortunate that and truly blessed that I was able to take all my experiences and what I learned on the inside and not just bring them to the outside, but be able to use them in a way that I feel like I'm still serving the inside from the outside. And what I realized, and what I'd like everyone who's on the inside thinking about getting out, and who always ask, how do I translate this? How do I translate that? It's it sounds daunting. It's not as difficult as it seems, because really we talked a lot about it here. A lot of it's leadership. People want to understand that you can lead. You can lead a team, you can lead a project. It's management. You can manage activities, whether they're your activities and you're delivering something in the end, or the activities of others. People want to understand that you can start something and deliver it. They want to understand that you'll show up. They like seeing progression because it means that you understand how to manage within a construct. They want to know that you've worked on your own and in teams, and you've worked with a diversity of problems, bigger problem sets, differences, because that makes you incredibly valuable. So when I first, part of what I do too is people will say, hey, do you know anyone who could be a chief marketing officer that has a clearance but has actually been successful with an IPO and an initial public offering and all these, they want the list, the laundry list. And I think, ugh, in my head, I think, all right, who do I know who has either retired or resigned? And I think about that, because I know that even though they've not been a CMO or served yet in the C-suite, they have served in a C-suite. They're on the outside. There's profit and loss centers, P&L centers. Have you managed a P&L center? Have you grown it? Have you all these things that people want to know? Well, you don't use the same language either in the military or in these other government departments and agencies, including the intelligence community, but you're doing just that. And
Mhm.
so you're so valuable because you've successfully delivered, and that gets you to the same playing field, the level playing field, as people who've worked in companies who have had those specific titles and have actually managed those profit and loss centers. Because people say everybody wants to know that you've made money. They want to know you can make money if depending on the job you have. It's not that you've made money. And if you've been successful in delivering capability, mission, operations, etc., then you've done that. And so I think realizing it and understanding that all the value you had, if you were going to change jobs in the inside, you need to feel that again. And that's what you want to put on paper. That's what you want to articulate to people. It's sort of like how you were talking, Chris, about if there's differences in people, how they communicate, and how you recruit from historically Black colleges and universities, and women, how they will communicate on paper. If it's not perfect, they don't want to present it. Those kinds of things, it's the same way. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to write down what you did and articulate it in some way. And I think, and get help from the outside, because everybody before you is so grateful for the support and help they got. They are aching to support and help you. And so leverage your network and keep building your network. Everyone will take a call. You don't say, "Ooh, I don't know. I can't call Chris Hughes. He's retired 2-star. I don't, he does, who's the exec and all that." No, it doesn't work that way. Once you're on the outside, you're just who you are, and you want to help everyone. Right. Just call. And they will be thrilled that you thought enough of them once they're on the outside, and be incredibly helpful. I think the other thing I might add is we talked about network. When I was promoted to senior exec, there were a group of us, about 5 of us, who, when you went around the room for, your charm school, that said network is the most important, the people who and the experiences, like at War College and other places. And we set up this program on the inside. It was called Network with NSIS. It's Senior Intelligence Service instead of Senior Executive Service. You got to make a new acronym because you're in another organization, but same kind of thing. And it was not the sort of formal, more, I'll call it, heavy lift of a mentor relationship, because you have to get properly matched. You have all these rules and things that the bureaucracy puts in place for all good reasons, but people still wanted to give back and help. And so you could just ask one question, and then we would sort of match the questions to that. We put them out to all the people, and you might get 3 people who call you to answer a question, and that's people on the inside. But some of those questions were, when you're on the inside, I'm getting ready to depart the organization. Can someone help me translate this particular experience? And people will help you. So while you're on the inside and they're still on the inside, they'll still help you, because if we have really strong people who know us on the inside, who are on the outside, they're gonna be really primed to help the inside again. I also believe in revolving doors. I think you should be able to come back and bring the wealth of experience you gained at a different level in your life, and still come back inside if that's where you want to be. But even with organizations, retiree organizations, or former organizations, alumni organizations of departments and agencies, they have really great networks for you to lean on, to find out how do you translate what you've done into words that people understand. And again, I'm happy to help too.
Very good. So we end with isms. Now, if you have isms, that's what we want to hear. And I didn't prep you for this. So do you have, of all your experience and all of the things that you learned over time, and let's say we're your new staff and you're going to walk in and introduce yourself, what are the 3 things that you want us to know about you, your Karenisms, if there is such a thing?
Great Karenisms. I'm glad my grown kids aren't here, because they'd have a few to add to the list. They actually keep a little tiny book. It's been a running joke for about 10 years, so I'm not going to pull out that book. But I think you need to try first to solve your own problems. And if you want to bring, and I'm incredibly approachable, you can come to me for anything, but I'm going to ask you, what did you do to solve it yourself? Did you try to engage with the right people? Did you look something up? What did you do? You need to, and the same thing goes for career. People always come for career advice. You are your best career manager. What are you mapping out besides asking me to fix it for you, kind of a thing? So I'm very approachable, very helpful, but I expect when you come to me, you've done some work yourself, and you're going to be able to walk through that and then say, what do you think? And then I'm happy to engage. So I think that's an important one. And be kind. I mean, when I talk to leadership classes in the organization, people have all these great stories and they talk about all these experiences, and we only got one thing to leave people with. And I said, be kind. I mean, in this age of not being face to face, it's sort of like, wait till you see the whites of their eyes. That's hard to shoot when they have the same little whites of eyes as you do. When you're sitting behind a computer, you can be very aggressive, even if it's unintentional. And most times it's, I would say, not. People know what they're doing. It's willful. And you need to be kind first. If you write an email and it looks stupid to put hi, and it looks, and at the bottom, thank you or best regards, because the inside was you ripping someone a new one, rewrite your email.
Yeah.
Pick
Yeah.
up the phone and have a conversation instead. But be kind, because I think a lot of issues happen from people misinterpreting, because they everyone's different and they need additional sensory input. And you don't get that from things in writing. You don't get that from little short texts. So you got to be on the phone and hear the voices, or sort of see the whites of their eyes, be in person, etc. So I think that's really important. I just have a very, very, very short tolerance for people who are not first kind.
Very nice. Very nice. That's, and I backed off of an email I almost hit send on yesterday for that exact reason. That exact reason. It was like, because you can't read in the context of what they're actually trying to say.
Right.
People read into a comma or a dash or all caps,
I know. I know. And when you read an email, try to assume the best of it. But I think you asked me for 3. So,
Yeah.
do the work first, be kind. And the other thing is, take a risk. Take a risk. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? You fall down and you get back up again, or you learn something. On one program I did, I had nothing to brief on my monthly to the senior leadership, because I just knew my big idea. We were going to get all this great info and new ways of doing business. And it was an utter disaster. And so I just got up there and I'm like, this is going to be amazing. I had my first success. I want to just brief this. And I'm going through all of this. And I said, so absolute failure. But what we learned is going to save us time. And now we're going to revector. And I just they're like, what are you doing up there? And I said, look, I'm not sure. It's better to take a risk and lose quick than just drag it out and not know. So you just got to kind of revector it in a way that, you learned your lesson and you knew what happened. But I do think that people forget in a risk gain calculus to calculate the risk of doing nothing. You need to put in, when you write down, what you need to say, what's the risk of doing nothing? And I think that's in managing government programs, managing your life, taking a new job, doing a new career thrust. In anything you do, the risk of doing nothing can actually be much larger than all these little concerns you have that is in the column next to it. So I would say, take a risk.
Yeah. And the beauty of that, one of the things we teach here, Karyn, I think you appreciate it. You were forced to learn the military decision-making model,
Yes.
and you went through wargaming and had to figure out courses of action and do decision matrices. And one of the things I added to a decision matrix years after we graduated was to do nothing. And so, yeah, course of action 1, it was always do nothing. Just, when somebody says, give me courses of action, it implies you're expecting to change. When in fact, what you might learn in the process is that what you're doing now is okay. And you should probably, but also it validates that it's not, because a risk is a factor, a criteria that you evaluate. So that's a great statement. I appreciate that. Now, I really wish one of your kids would walk up behind me. I know they're grown and gone. I want to hear one of their top 3. I mean, that would be fascinating, but maybe another time we'll put you on the spot. But no, I really appreciate your time today. I've learned an awful lot about you. I thought I knew a lot about you, but I not as much as I'd hoped. So anyway, it's great to see you, and I appreciate your time today. And again, for those who are out there who may be thinking about the interagency or even going in specifically into the CIA, Karyn is on our website, and we're happy to connect you. Thanks, Karyn. Have a great day.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Very much enjoyed it. And, everyone else have a great day, great holidays, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Bye-bye.